listening to The Trauma Beat, hosted by me, Tamara Cherry. Check the show notes for anything that might activate your own trauma responses. And as always, like, subscribe, leave a review, do what you can if you like what you hear. Episode 3, my conversation with school shooting survivor, Angela M. Let's get started. Angela, why don't you just start out by introducing yourself?
I'm Angela McQueen. I am a high school teacher in Illinois, and in September 2017, I subdued and disarmed a school shooter in our cafeteria.
What are your first recollections, Angela, of the media or the media coverage after your traumatic event?
It was very overwhelming. I felt like they were kind of pushy because of the situation that I was in and what I had done. I immediately got lots of phone calls and those kind of things. And I felt like it was constant for, 24, 48 hours at least. I mean, I know it slowed down, but like for that first 24, 48 hours, I felt like I was constantly inundated with stuff from the media, like requests from the media. So that was very, very hard.
You, just to expand on that a little bit, because you filled out one of the surveys for my research project, and in it you described journalists staking out your house in the hours after the shooting, calling your house, calling your work phone, emailing your work email, calling your cell phone repeatedly. I don't think that would necessarily surprise journalists because they've probably done those things. But can you just expand on what that experience was like for you as you were also dealing with, obviously, the trauma that you had just experienced?
Right. Well, like the staking out the house, wasn't actually home. They were gone by the time I got home, but somebody, like, they had posted or tweeted or whatever, the picture of my house with them there. And that somebody had showed it to me, and that kind of freaked me out a little bit. I'm like, what if they're still there? Even once I got home, I'm like, are they going to come back? Are they going to just, keep coming to my house until they catch me? I don't think when we were talking about the staking out the house, I think they think about other people, because they were doing that for my house, but little known to them, the house directly across from me had a girl, she was a freshman in the cafeteria, a young lady. So then they're trying to process that as a family when, she's, potentially a few feet from the shooter. And then now they have this media right out front of their house as well. So that I feel like that probably, I know that affected them because, like, they made a comment, like, not necessarily like more of in a joking way, but like about the media being out there. The phone calls and stuff, like I said, was overwhelming. It's not like it was like, here's a phone call, here's an email. Like when I'm getting dozens, I get home from what happened afterwards, and I've got multiple emails on my home phone. When I got back to work the next day, there were multiple calls on my work phone. I had multiple emails, and it's like I said, it wasn't just, the only person that called my cell phone was CBS, I believe. And they called, I want to say 3 or 4 times. I kept ignoring them, and eventually they stopped. But yeah, I mean, it's the multiple ones, and I didn't like the cell phone thing. Somebody had to have given them my cell phone number, because I'm pretty stingy with that. But just the inundation over and over, like, why wouldn't you just wait for me to respond? That would have been nice. So like I said, it's just the over and over and over dealing with it. So that caused a lot of anxiety for me, because I'm still in a fog, and then I'm getting all this. And that was one of the things, like the superintendent, like the next day asked, what can we do? And I'm like, well, I'm getting phone calls out the wazoo. So is there anything you can do? And I don't know how he dealt with that. But he tried to do something with that so that I wasn't getting as many calls. And I know it slowed down within 3 to 5 days. It hit slow down, but
that would have been a long 3 to 5 days.
Oh yeah. Well, and just like I said, okay, you did it once, you didn't get a response. Give me a chance to respond, and I'll talk more about that later. But it was super overwhelming.
I didn't put this question in the list that I sent you, so feel free to just skip over it if you're not comfortable asking or answering. But just everything you're saying, you keep saying that you didn't get a chance to respond. Did you want to respond? Did any part of you want to talk to the media?
At some point, yes. I mean, I'll talk about this later, or I can talk about it now. Yeah, I mean, yes and no, like not in that moment. No, like not in the moment. Like I was overwhelmed and I want to be done. Now, later on, yes, but in that moment, no, no.
You described in your survey that the journalists that you did encounter were pushy, and you said that they didn't care about you. Are you referring to the journalists who were trying to contact you, or ones that you actually saw? Are you comfortable expanding on that?
Well, a little bit of both. It was just the ones that, like I said, it was over and over and over.
Right.
Like, CBS, you called my cell phone 3 times and I ignored you and you just kept calling. Eventually, I think they're actually the ones that my parents ended up doing an interview with. So they may have given up on me and then went there. So yeah, it's the over and over and over, but then not waiting for the response. But then the ones that got me more were the more local situations. There's a couple different ones, but the one that got me more was a little bit afterwards. We were trying to do some stuff for to help people. I mean, I know it was within a year, it was like that spring, I believe, just trying to help people understand trauma and like how it could have affected them. Those kind of things. We wanted to have maybe like a panel discussion, not specifically about the shooting, although we wanted to have an opportunity for people to talk about or ask questions that they may particularly have. Well, one of the people that were going to be a part of that panel went to the newspaper and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you mind like getting the word out so that we could, get parents, and because our school district didn't really want to get the word out. So we thought, well, we'll go to the newspaper and see if they'll get the word out for us. Well, the guy messages me on Facebook, the reporter that had done the initial thing, and was basically, because we basically said this is going to be not close, it's open to public, but he basically said he wanted to come and cover it like it was a basketball game. And I'm like, that's not what this is for. This is a panel discussion for people to understand about trauma and learn about trauma and potentially ask questions. They're not going to do that with a reporter sitting next to them. Well, then his response back to me was, well, we're going to run a story saying you're denying us access. Awesome. So then we're like scrambling. Okay, so what do we do now? Because we're not about being negative and negative press. We're just trying to help people, and you're trying to interfere with this, attempt to help people. I was like, so should we do like a public thing and then, like a general thing about trauma, and then cut it off to the public, and then parents and kids, if you want to stay, staff, if you want to stay, then we'll have more of a question answer type situation. And so we were going through that. Well, but then our shooter's family posted on Facebook, hey, we're coming. And then everybody's like, oh, no, we're not coming. So we ended up having to cancel it anyway. So it probably wasn't the best thing to go to the media in the first place. But just the whole threatening, like we're gonna run a story about you denying us access. Like we're just trying to help people.
Yeah.
And you clearly don't understand that. Like you're trying to sensationalize stuff. I feel like maybe they were wanting to try to come and get people's stories, which is not, I mean, that's not what that was for. I mean, like I said, it's not a basketball game. like this is they were just trying to help people. And that was very frustrating, that you kind of screwed it up. But.
And that was a situation where the media in that case could have played a role in helping to do good rather than
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And instead of supporting us in that, they were like, I don't want to say sensationalized, but I feel like they had their own motives for doing it. I mean, it wasn't about helping people. It was, what stories can we get out of this? Right. So.
Right. You described in your survey, Angela, an interview that you granted months after the shooting, for which the journalist said that they were only going to do a background piece about you and not talk about the shooting at all. And then the journalist ended up asking you about the shooting. Can you tell me what impact that had on you, being taken off guard like that?
Well, it totally reframed how I would interact with media. I said I did want to talk to media, and I did want to get my story out. But up until that point, sometimes when these things happen, the trials and stuff happen fairly quickly. And then sometimes they don't. Like ours was over a year because they kept asking for continuances over and over and over. So everything kept getting pushed off. So I was very careful about what I was saying, because I'm thinking I don't want to say anything that's going to potentially screw anything up. I mean, I wouldn't think anything I would have said would have screwed it up, but I'm trying to be very careful about, I know what information is already out there, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say. So I didn't really want to talk specifically about that until I knew the trial was over, until things were done. And my superintendent had asked me to do it as a favor to, he had a friend that was, I don't know what she was with the paper, but somebody affiliated with the paper. And I said, as long as they don't ask about the shooting, fine. Well, they actually did. I thought they did multiple background pieces. I know they did one on our SRO, our school resource officer, and I read it. And it was exactly what they said it was. It was a background piece. They didn't talk about the shooting, I don't believe, at all. I mean, it was all about who he was, where he grew up, background, degrees, education, how he got into law enforcement, how he ended up as an SRO, those kind of things. So I assumed it was going to be fine. It was going to be like they said it was, but when he came to my room that day, and he did a couple background questions. I don't remember what they were. He asked me a couple things. He asked me one, and he's like, "So you're from Marshall, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then immediately he went into the shooting. Like, he asked me like 2 background questions, then immediately went into the shooting. And this was another local journalist. It wasn't the same one as the other. But like I said, I've had more problems with a local journalist, I think, than overall. But then that's framing my whole reaction to everything. So as he's asking me these questions, like now at this point, I would just say no, and I would walk out of the room. Mm-hmm. At that time, we're a few months in, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months. And my reaction was different at that point. Number one, I was completely taken aback. Like, when my boss says, "Please do this," I guarantee you this isn't going to happen. And then it does. Like, I didn't know what to do. I don't want to say I freaked out, but like, I was like, what do I do now? My boss asked me to do this. Can I walk out? I don't know if I can walk out. But now I wouldn't even care if I would be like, nope. And then I would just go to my boss and say, this is what happened. But I'm far enough removed from it and I'm far enough in my healing process now that I feel like I could do that. Mm-hmm. But at the time I was just like, so then I'm trying to be very careful about what he's asking and what I'm saying. And then I remember at one point saying something, and you could tell by his reaction, he didn't know that. That was something that apparently no one was aware. I think it was the fact that our administrator came in with the SRO after I'd got the kid down. But then he starts asking follow-up questions, and I'm like, crap. And I'm trying to be as careful as I can. Like I said, I don't know that anything I would have said would have messed anything up, but I'm completely taken aback. I'm trying to be as careful as I can. And then he just keeps, I don't want to say hounding, but keeps asking. So like that upset me. And I can't remember, I remember calling at least once my superintendent, and I was bawling. I was upset, because he asked. I feel like I called him and said, hey, he asked about the shooting. He wasn't supposed to. And I was really upset. And then like the next day, the paper came out, or the article came out, and he actually misquoted me on something. And I don't remember what it was specifically, but so I'm frustrated. The fact that you did something you said you weren't going to do. You lied. You told my boss you weren't going to ask. And then that's all your story was. And then on top of that, you misquoted me. And I don't even remember if it was a huge misquote, but it was something that, I was bothered by. So I know I called him again. And so then I'm having this anxiety. I'm upset for the next few days because you did this to me. You're affecting my healing process by doing that. Mm-hmm.
And when you say affecting your healing process, is it the broken trust? Is that the biggest thing? And also just having to have you live through those moments again when you weren't expecting it, having to it?
Well, yeah. And then the concern, like I said, I was very concerned that I didn't want to say or do anything to screw anything up, because I wanted to make sure that he got an appropriate punishment. So, I mean, that's part of it too. And part of my trauma and dealing with trauma is stress management and anxiety, and doing that, like surprise. Mm-hmm. I've never liked surprises, but I don't deal well with surprises anymore. That kind of thing. Then that surprises tend to increase my anxiety. So
that's a very common sentiment that I've heard from many trauma survivors. Do you think that in that moment when that journalist was asking you those questions that you didn't want to answer, but you were you answering them because you didn't feel like you could say no? You didn't know what your rights were? You were trying to be polite? Like, how would you describe that? Or is it just that you didn't have a chance to think about it. It was just, you were there and, you know, like what has changed between then and now? Because you said now you just say, no, move on.
I would say mostly thought, like I didn't have a chance to think. And then partially politeness. Cause like I said, I was afraid, like, what if I say no? Is my boss then going to be mad at me? He asked me to do this. Am I going to, I don't want to say get in trouble with my boss, but you know, you don't know. I mean, and I mean, not that it's paranoid, but like maybe the boss did know that. I don't think he did, but like, what if the boss did know that he was going to ask those things? Like you don't know. But I think in the moment, yeah, I appreciate that. But like I said, it's mostly just not having the chance to think. Like I said, I feel like my brain processes stuff slower. I'm not dumb, but sometimes it takes a second to click. And like I said, I'm better now than I was back then. That, you know, I feel more confident now in my ability to be like, okay, no, I can process a little faster now, or, oh, wait a second. No, hey, you know, Mr. Lilly said that you weren't going to talk about this. So why exactly are we? I feel like I could have had a better response now than I could have then.
Mm-hmm. How do you?
Well, I like this, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, please continue.
I was gonna say, I feel like I'm more confident now. I've spoken more. Like that was maybe the second time I spoke. I spoke to the teachers union. They wanted to do something. Well, actually, I think if I'm trying to remember, we had a meeting with multiple school people, and they wanted a way to get some information out there to appease journalists, appease media within a more structured, like we have control over what's going out. So we did something with the teachers union. They did, or the IEA, the local or the state union, put like a little thing out where they talked to me. But I talked then, and then I talked to this guy, and that was only the second time. Now I've talked enough about my experience, and I've talked to different people, not necessarily reporters, but I've talked enough about my experience now that I feel more comfortable and confident in speaking.
And with the teachers union, like with your first interview, if we can call it that there was a layer of protection there because you weren't talking directly to the public. You weren't talking directly to the media.
Yeah.
They were looking out for your best interests and doing something to try to, I guess, keep the media away. Like the media wants a story.
Yeah.
Let's give them one. And do you think that helped? Like the teachers union putting that out? Do you think it helped appease the media or satiate their appetite for the story?
I think a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I got some of the basic information, the basic story out. So yeah, because like at that point, I don't think nobody had heard anything from me. So hearing the situation from my perspective, I think gave enough at that time.
This might seem like some obvious answers for this question, but if you could just spell it out for me, Angela, how do you think that the media coverage, whether in the immediate aftermath of the event or months down the road, could have been done differently to make the experience more positive for you?
Ooh, I would say, and I know they don't want to do this because everybody wants the news in the moment, but giving some time, like they didn't even wait 24 hours. I mean, if you can wait 48 hours, 5 days, whatever, not that would fix it, but in that moment, you were in such a fog. Like I call it brain fog. I still get brain fog sometimes, especially around the anniversary, but you know, there's like a cloud, like you can't think clearly. You're not thinking about everything. Like we had like some of us, not all of us, did like a quick little discussion with a guy trained in critical incidents afterwards, you know, and I've talked to him since then. And he, you know, he's like, I don't want to say I didn't learn anything from it, but like stuff went in one ear and out the other. Cause in that moment you're just numb. And he said, you know, you could tell like your face, you're just like, you're there, but you're not there in that moment. So giving people a chance to decompress just a little bit would be nice. And you're not going to decompress necessarily in 3 to 5 days, but there's going to be less of that fog. You're going to be able to think a little bit clearly. Like emailing, I feel like is a little bit better because that gives you a little bit of a chance to respond. Like I can think about my response. You know, if you'd waited 3 to 5 days to email me, then at that point, I'll get into this. I think I get into this later, but that gives me a chance to think about what I want to say. Or maybe at that point I can say, yeah, I do want to talk to you, but I don't feel I'm ready yet. So maybe we could schedule something in 2 weeks, a month. Now, maybe they don't want to wait that long, but at least that gives me the opportunity to do that. Cause like, to me, emailing isn't quite as intimidating. Versus but to me, the phone calls are a little more personal. I mean, that's how it is in general with relationships. If you're emailing is much less personal than picking up the phone and calling somebody, a text is less personal than picking up and video calling or phone calls, those kind of things. So that would be good. I'm kind of looking at some notes to see. Just I want to say, being more transparent. Because like I said, we had those couple different situations with the local reporters. Like I felt like they weren't the one wasn't overly transparent. The other one was kind of pushy. Like this past summer, I had the chance to do 60 Minutes, and they had a thing on Carnegie heroes, and the Carnegie had asked me to do it. And I said, yeah, I'll think about it. So then when I started talking to the people from 60 Minutes, like they refused to give the questions ahead of time. Like they weren't going to let me see any questions. I was like, well, if we did this, could I see what is going to be presented before you actually, put it out on air? No. And not having any sort of input into that, and that would be one of my suggestions I was going to talk about later is being a little more transparent, with people. Like that would have been a more positive experience for me. So having went through this negative experience with our local people, now I have this really cool opportunity, and that lack of transparency then kind of feeds over into here. Although it was good because then I knew to ask, hey, can I see some questions ahead of time? And they said no. But
how would that have helped you, Angela? I'm sorry to interrupt there, but I want to dig into that a little bit deeper if we can. Getting the questions. I mean, you're in a situation right now where you have the list of questions ahead of time. You could think about it. Is it about creating that safety? Like you said, when you're surprised by something that creates anxiety for you, is that what it's about?
Yeah. I mean, mostly. Yeah. It's mostly about being able to stop and think. And like I said, I'm not dumb. I can process things, but sometimes it takes me a second for things to click. If you're asked, sometimes I have to have people ask a question a second time because it takes a second for me to figure out what they're doing. And if I can have something ahead of time and stop and think, okay, well, how would I answer this? How would I say this? And make sure I don't want to say it the right way. That takes that anxiety away. So, cause like I said, I don't ever want to be in the same situation where I was before, where I'm kind of blindsided, by a reporter or somebody from the media. So that would be very helpful. Some more transparency of being willing to, do those kind of things.
And I just want to take this chance right now to point out the fact, because I think that a lot of journalists, if they were asked, why won't you show the questions ahead of time? I mean, there's a couple things. First of all, it's just the way things have always been done, and it's the way they're done with every type of news story. But one of the messages I'm trying to convey is that when it comes to trauma, it's got to be treated differently. It's just different. It's not a politician. It's not, a professional athlete. You're not talking to some kid at the school fair. But also, journalists might think that they won't get the authenticity from somebody if they give them the questions ahead of time. They'll just be reading off a script. But I'd like to point out, Angela, you're coming across as very authentic and very candid. And in my experience interviewing many survivors who have had the chance to make notes ahead of time, like you, I find that it leads to better responses, because you can be more thorough. And I don't want you to be left after the interview saying, shoot, I didn't think to say this. I wish that I would have known that question was coming. So I just wanted to point that out for anybody listening or watching, that it can be beneficial both ways. Not that journalists should necessarily need to see the benefit for themselves, but if they do, I would just point that out as a former journalist. Did you want to add something there, Angela?
No, I was going to say that's kind of skipping ahead, because one of the questions you were going to ask was about how, what advice would you have for journalists? Like, you literally almost said exactly one of the things that I was going to say, is you have to treat people differently, people with trauma differently. I mean, in education, we call it differentiation. Kids are different. You have to treat them differently. You have to teach things differently. It's the same thing here. And I literally wrote down politician, athlete, I completely understand why you wouldn't want to give a politician questions ahead. I totally understand that, but trauma is different. So yeah.
You're holding a politician to account. You're not holding a trauma survivor to account. You don't need to have an accountability interview with the trauma survivor.
Right.
Something that came up a lot in various surveys, especially in the mass violence school shooting communities, was that that media coverage can create a hierarchy amongst survivors. You mentioned in your survey that the media can create a hierarchy even amongst different shootings. Can you expand on that and the impact that you think that has on various survivors?
Well, I don't think it's just relegated to the media. I think it's society in general has a hierarchy. Like, to me, it's, well, nobody died in your shooting, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Or, oh, you only had 2 or 3 people get hurt, so it's not that big of a deal. It's like, because no one died, you should get over it real quickly. But that's not how trauma works. It's just not. I think it's just a lack of understanding on how trauma affects people, that you don't just get over it. You aren't just fine. Just because it wasn't a Columbine doesn't mean that we weren't affected just as much. So, I mean, that to me, the big thing is the lack of understanding of trauma and how trauma affects people is the big thing. And I don't, like I said, I don't think it's relegated just to media. Everybody thinks you should get over it. You know, people will make comments about, you know, getting over, why aren't you over yet? It's not like anybody died. Like, even people within the community that weren't directly related to the school, they don't have kids there, you know, that kind of thing. But that's not how trauma works. You don't tell a rape victim, you know, get over it. You raped, get over it. You know, why do you tell us survivors, you know, nobody died, you're okay, get over it? And like I said, I don't feel like that's just media. It's just society in general.
What impact does that have on you, Angela, like hearing those sorts of comments?
It makes us feel like what we went through didn't matter, like that it wasn't a big deal. Well, everybody's telling me I should be fine, so I guess I should be fine. But, you know, if you haven't dealt with your trauma, then no, you're not going to be fine. If you haven't started that healing process, you're not going to be fine. But like I said, it makes us feel like I don't want to say we don't matter, but like what we went through didn't matter, because it wasn't a big deal. Yeah. Or it wasn't a big event.
And I've heard from other survivors that have expressed extremely similar sentiments to you, Angela, that hearing that actually stopped them from getting the help that they needed, like for several years, you know, so they didn't access those mental health supports that could have helped them earlier on because they felt like their trauma wasn't validated. What about the media coverage of other traumatic events? How are you impacted by that?
Not a lot, I would say, anymore, except when it's the like 24/7 multiple day events. Like, that's harder for me, because then I'm like, okay, I feel like I either have to get off social media or I can't be on social media much. Or if I'm watching TV, I got to make sure I'm flipping the channel a lot. When it's the huge coverage, the 24/7 type stuff, I do like to be informed enough that I'm not like surprised. The only time I ever really remember being, other than the 24/7 stuff, being super impacted was like 4 months or so after the shooting. One of my students came in, and like the first thing he did in class was run up to me and say, "Did you hear about the shooting in Marshall?" And I'm like I immediately stopped, because where I grew up is called Marshall. I was like, and I was like, oh my God, we just had a shooting here in Mattoon. And then now where I grew up, we had a shooting. And then I'm in my brain, I'm thinking this. And then as he's talking, I realized, oh, he's talking about Marshall, Kentucky. I mean, but then that rest of that day, my heart's like, you know, thinking about that, because then you start thinking, well, yeah, it could happen in Marshall as well. But that's the only one I really remember being majorly impacted by. I mean, the rest of them, like I call it like an icky feeling, like you hear it and you get, but then that's kind of it. And like I said, if I stay informed, because like I'm on the Facebook page, the Rebels Facebook page. So somebody will say something about trigger warning. I usually go look so that I figure out what's going on, just so that I have enough information. And and then that's usually enough for me. I mean, it's not, like I said, unless it's the huge events like the Vegas or Parkland or those kind of things, uh, I can usually handle it pretty well. I mean, I'll feel icky. Maybe I don't sleep great for a night or two, but I'm okay for the most part with those.
But if I understand you correctly, what I'm hearing is that, you know, you get yourself enough information so that you have that control. So you're not surprised.
Yeah.
Somebody doesn't run up to you and say, did you hear about, and you're not
right. Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, honestly, I feel like that's kind of why whenever somebody posts something about like a trigger warning, like I feel like that's why I go do that, so that it's not, hey, surprise.
Yeah.
And then you're shocked.
Yeah. Angela, what does the term trauma-informed journalism mean to you?
For me, it's knowing enough about trauma, or taking enough time to learn about trauma, and that to learn that it affects people differently. You know, it might affect one person XYZ, somebody else ABC, understanding that it affects everybody differently, trying to be aware of the ways it can affect people, because hopefully that can frame how you interact with survivors. Like if you understand that, you know, surprise interviews are going to cause somebody anxiety, and maybe that might be their trigger is anxiety, you know, maybe you are going to be more willing to provide those questions up front. So those kind of things. So like understanding enough about trauma to understand that there's a lot of different reactions to trauma. I mean, for me, one of the things that I struggled with initially was I didn't think I was that affected, because I didn't have nightmares and I didn't have flashbacks. So I'm not that affected. And everybody's telling us, well, nobody died. Yay. It's not that big of a deal. Get over it. But then when I started doing my own research and figuring things out on my own and realizing, oh, stress management, oh, anxiety, oh, XYZ things that I am struggling with are part of that. So understanding those kind of things would be, or I think is helpful. So, and being more willing to be patient, and not, I've got to get to somebody within that first 24 hours. I got to get within the first 48 hours, giving them that chance to decompress. So understanding enough about trauma, and giving people a chance to decompress, I feel like are part of being trauma informed.
What would your advice be to other survivors who may be faced with media attention like you were?
I would say don't seek it out. Not necessarily don't do it, but don't seek it out. I would say for me, you know, my reaction 2 days after, 2 months after, 2 weeks after would be very different than 2 years after. So it's not necessarily how I would interact with the media would be different at those different points of times. I wouldn't say don't do it. I would just say give yourself a chance to decompress yourself. So if somebody is wanting to contact you, give yourself some grace, give yourself some time. You know, if that's just like, hey, I don't want to talk right now, can you give me a week? Those kind of things. So don't necessarily not do it, but give yourself some grace, give yourself some time to at least get through that fog before you do that. So I mean, like, yeah. I mean, because like right now, I want to say I want to, but I want to share. I want to help. I haven't done a lot of interviews, but I've done a lot of speaking, and I like doing that speaking because like I said, I want to help people understand trauma. I want to help people get better from whatever they're dealing with, or even just interacting with people that have been through something traumatic. So
you mentioned earlier how you said, you know, you said to your school administrator or your superintendent, you know, when they asked what can we do to help, you mentioned the media. What about advice for victim service providers or other people whose roles may be to support survivors? How can they better support survivors with the media?
Well, just in general, I wish there was a program like I would call it like a Now What program. So you've been through this thing, and it wouldn't affect some places like, you know, Vegas or a mall or something necessarily like that, but like school shootings, workplace shootings, you know, we train on, so we got a shooter, what do you do? So we train on that. But then once that's done, there's no program for now what? Now how do you handle things? How do you handle healing? How do you handle when the media is calling? How do you do those things? So if there was a way to create a program that could help survivors I mean, and that would just be one aspect within that program. But creating some sort of program, like a Now What program. Okay, you've been through this horrible thing. Now, how do you move forward? How do you deal with the media? How do you deal with your trauma? How do you deal with everything? That would be nice. I don't know how realistic that is, because even if those programs are available, like that doesn't mean the school or the workplace or those kind of things are going to take advantage of it. Like, because I work to try to get some, not a program, but some people that have been through shootings and stuff before to come in and, can we have those people come in and talk us through some stuff? No, we're good. Okay. Okay.
Wow.
And I feel like a lot, just based off, being a part of the Facebook page, the Rebels Facebook page, kind of sometimes reading the comments, like the way workplaces are, that they don't necessarily, I'm not sure if they would necessarily be open to that. I think that would be helpful, but I don't know if they would be open to that, because it's like, here's a rug, let's sweep it under, and then we're going to roll up the rug, and then we're going to stick it in a closet and lock it and then burn the house down. Because that's how trauma works. If you just, but those kind of things, creating a program, and that would, like I said, that would be one aspect of it, is dealing with the media. But how do you deal with the aftermath? And because like I said, I wasn't prepared for getting all the phone calls and emails and all that. If there would have been something in place that they could have went to and said, okay, as soon as this happened, we're contacting this organization, and then they have that. Okay, when it comes to media, you do this.
Yes. And those
that would have been nice.
Have to be put in place immediately.
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, I mean, you've said so much already throughout our interview, and we sort of addressed this question earlier, but what advice, do you have any other advice for journalists that you wanted to mention who might be covering these sorts of incidents?
When you start talking about this, because we've talked about different things like providing the questions ahead and those kind of things. But when you're talking about school shootings, understanding that, like, we can't talk. Like, I wasn't supposed to give an interview, let alone make a statement, let alone ask questions or answer questions. Like, typically when you're talking about a school shooting, you're going to have a district person that is going to be responsible for that already. So understanding that maybe instead of calling multiple staff or multiple teachers, or trying to go to the school and pull staff members as you see them walking out of the building, instead of doing something like that, contacting that spokesperson. That would be, I think, helpful to the staff. Also, when you're talking about kids, we're talking about kids still. Our brains don't develop until we're around 25. Here they're trying to process this trauma, and then, you're trying to interview these kids that are standing out along the street, as they've ran from the shooting. Like, understanding that they are kids, maybe back off a little bit. They are minors. You can get parent permission, I think, for the minors, but let the kids deal with the trauma. Not necessarily that you don't ever talk to the kids, but kind of like you do with the adults as well. Like, give them a chance to decompress. And then maybe you have that opportunity to talk to a parent, and the parent says, yeah, sure, I'm okay with this, my kid talking. Well, maybe this other parent isn't okay with your kid talking. So
did you have that after your event, Angela? Like, was the media outside your school trying to talk to the kids after it happened?
I know they were at some point, because I remember seeing interviews with different kids. Because, like, I remember a kid talking about, I remember where he was in the cafeteria. He was next to our vending machines, and he had dove under the table, and then he got his friends out. I remember him talking about that. And he was not, I know he was not 18 at the time. So he was an underclassman. I think maybe they talked to him because we had a reunification center. I'm guessing it was there. I'm not sure where it was, but I would assume it would have been at the reunification center. They'd grab some kids because they either ran there or were bused there, or they could have got them along the side of the road, I suppose, too. But yeah, there were some kids that had spoke. Not a ton, but I know there were some.
Is there anything else, Angela, you would like people in general to know about the experience of trauma survivors?
We've already kind of talked to it, but everybody's different. Everybody's reactions are going to be different. Everybody's healing is going to be different. Healing is not linear. You're not going to just get over it. You learn how to deal with trauma, but you don't get over that trauma. Timing is going to be different for everybody. You know, some people are going to start to heal fairly quickly. They won't ever fully heal, but they will heal fairly quickly. Some people will take longer. And like I said, it's not linear. To me, it's like more of an ebb and flow. Like for me, it's to the point where so instead of having like, I'm here, I'm doing good, and then going way down and up, it's like more of a, okay, I have a little dip and up. And I feel like I'm at the point now where I don't very often have the big dips anymore, which is good. But yeah, everybody's different. Their healing's going to be different. They're never going to get better. They're never going to get over it. And be willing to show some grace to survivors when you're interacting with them. So
I think that's a really valuable point that you point out, that you're always going to carry that trauma. You might carry it heavier some days, lighter some days, but there's never a point that, you know, it's like, okay, they're totally fine. We can just walk in and hit them with these questions. Right. You need to remember that even after years and years have gone by after a traumatic event, trauma survivors are still holding on to that trauma, and they should be treated accordingly. Not like the professional athlete, not like the politician.
Right.
Angela, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Anything else you had in your notes that we didn't get to today?
No, I think it's pretty much it.
I hear your dogs. I guess they're ready to come in.
Probably. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angie.
No problem. Thank you.